welcome to another deep dive. You guys gave us a whole bunch of articles from the Dearborn Independent all the way back in 1920.
Okay.
And they all seem to be talking about this thing called the Jewish question.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of unpack all this stuff about Jewish power and Jewish influence.
Okay.
And maybe even a global agenda. Now, this is obviously a super sensitive topic, so we're going to approach it with open minds. And we're going to think critically about this stuff. Focus on understanding it, not passing judgment.
Exactly. These articles come from a very specific perspective.
Okay.
One that was controversial even back in 1920.
Yeah.
What we want to do today is really understand that perspective, figure out the historical context, and think about what all of this means.
Okay.
Both back then and today.
Okay, so right off the bat, the author uses this term, international Jew.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Basically, they're saying there's a difference between Jews who are integrated into their countries.
Okay.
And this other group labeled international Jews. Almost like a separate group.
Okay.
Operating as a unit across borders.
Okay.
Working together on a shared agenda.
And what exactly is this agenda that they're supposedly working towards?
Well, according to the author, it's about controlling global systems, finance, media, politics.
Okay.
Maybe even creating a world order that benefits them.
Wow. Okay. So it's a pretty big claim.
Yeah.
How do they back this up?
Well, they start by talking about Jewish financiers.
Okay.
And how they're supposedly dominating international banking and industries.
Okay.
You know, like things vital to global trade.
Okay.
Agriculture.
Okay.
Cotton, tobacco, sugar.
Okay.
Even department stores.
So it's not just like theoretical stuff. They're getting into like specifics here.
Exactly. They name names.
Wow.
Talk about businesses and industries.
Okay.
And it's more than just ownership.
Okay.
They claim that these international Jews manipulate these systems for their own gain, often at the expense of the Gentile world.
Wow.
They even say things like, economies are for the sake of the business, not the public.
Okay.
Like they don't care about the common good.
That's a pretty strong accusation to make.
It is, and we have to think about the context here. These articles were published in 1920.
Oh, yeah.
Right after World War I.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a time of major upheaval, lots of fear and uncertainty.
Right.
People didn't know what the future held.
So are you saying that the author was maybe playing on those anxieties?
It's possible.
Okay.
By portraying these international Jews as this hidden hand, controlling everything, they're offering a simple explanation for very complex problems.
Yeah.
And that can be really appealing when the world feels like it's falling apart.
It almost sounds like they're creating a scapegoat, blaming them for everything.
And that can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
When you start demonizing an entire group of people based just on their religion or ethnicity, it creates a climate where prejudice and discrimination thrive.
Yeah, and that's something we definitely need to keep in mind as we go through these articles.
Absolutely.
We need to understand the historical context, the anxieties of the time, and how they might have influenced the author's perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We also can't forget that the author keeps mentioning the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Oh, yeah, that document that supposedly lays out a plan for Jewish world domination.
Right, and even though the author acknowledges that it might not be authentic, they still use it to back up their claims. They argue that even if it's not a literal plan, it reflects a way of thinking, a set of principles that they believe is happening in the real world.
So are they suggesting that these international Jews are consciously following that plan?
It's not totally clear. But by bringing up the protocols, even in a questioning way, they're tapping into a very dangerous and old anti-Semitic myth.
And that seems to be a recurring theme here.
Yeah.
This mixing of real events with conspiracy theories to create a narrative that can be really convincing.
Yeah, especially for people who are already prejudiced.
Now, I'm curious about how the author connects this alleged agenda to America specifically. Do they think something similar is happening in the U.S.?
Oh, they definitely do. And that's where the most fascinating and troubling parts of these articles. They argue that the same forces they see at play in Europe are also working in America. They worry about Jewish control over land, resources, even the political system.
They're basically saying that America is also under threat from this conspiracy.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. They even issue a warning. urging American Jews to recognize this agenda and work towards a solution that benefits everyone. But again, we need to think about the context.
Yeah.
The early 1900s saw a huge wave of immigration to the U.S. There was a lot of anxiety about the changing demographics.
Right.
People were looking for someone to blame.
And unfortunately, Jewish people were often targeted.
Exactly.
Wow. This is giving us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
We've only just started looking at these Dearborn Independent articles, and already some really complex and disturbing themes are coming up.
We have a lot more to cover.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to get even more thought-provoking as we go deeper.
Okay.
We'll explore what the author says about Jewish influence in media, politics, and global events.
Okay, so join us for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll keep going down this rabbit hole.
Right.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
But only when we actively seek it out and think critically about it.
For sure. Okay, so in this part, I think we should take a closer look at how the author of these articles portrays Jewish control over media and public opinion.
You mentioned that they say Jewish interests have a big influence on the press. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. They also actually suggest that Jewish influence is strong enough to silence any criticism of what they call the Jewish question.
Okay.
They argue that there's a real effort to shape public perception in a way that favors Jewish interests and to suppress any voices that might disagree.
So it's not just about owning newspapers or media outlets.
Right.
They're talking about actually manipulating information that reaches the public?
Exactly. And they even give some examples, like cases where newspapers supposedly pulled advertising from businesses that even mentioned the subject of Jewish influence.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is.
Do they have any evidence to back that up?
Well, they describe this system where publications owned by Jewish people introduce certain ideas. And then those ideas are refuted or debunked by other outlets that seem independent. They argue that this creates the appearance of balanced reporting while subtly pushing public opinion in a specific direction.
It sounds like a pretty complicated plan.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any truth to it?
Well, whether or not you agree with the author, it does make you think about how media ownership influences the information we get.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much of what we read or hear is actually objective and how much is driven by some hidden agenda.
It definitely makes you think, but we can't forget that the author is coming from a very particular place, one that's full of prejudice and suspicion.
Exactly. And we need to be careful not to just accept these claims at face value. It's important to look at other perspectives and to think critically about the evidence they're presenting.
Now, the author also connects this media control to politics. Do they suggest that this influence affects government leaders as well?
They do. They claim that this influence is used to pick and control political leaders, even presidents.
Wow.
According to them, Jewish interests use their financial and media power to support candidates who will help them and to get rid of anyone who might be a problem.
So they're basically saying that these politicians are just puppets for powerful Jewish interests?
That's the argument. They say that Jewish influence works behind the scenes, shaping politics in ways that most people don't even see, and that this is a key part of their plan for world domination.
It's kind of a scary picture that they're painting.
It is. They even say that Jewish interests can manipulate political systems using things like campaign donations and lobbying to get what they want.
They also point to specific historical events to support their claims?
Yes.
Right.
They often bring up the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. They claim that it was planned and paid for by Jewish people to help them take over the world. They even suggest that this revolution was like a test. A way to see how they could overthrow other governments and create their own world order.
It seems like a big leap to connect world events to this Jewish conspiracy.
It is. And it's really important to remember that this view is highly controversial and not supported by historical evidence. The author is giving their own interpretation. But we need to consider other viewpoints and look closely at the evidence they provide. Blaming revolutions on just one group is a huge oversimplification.
So are they saying that this so-called international Jewish agenda is a threat that needs to be exposed?
Absolutely. And they believe this threat applies to America, too.
Okay.
They warn that the same things they claim are happening in Europe are also happening in the U.S.
What are their specific concerns about the U.S.?
They're worried about Jewish control over American land and resources, especially in agriculture. They talk about alleged attempts to control things like cotton production and land ownership. They say that Jewish people are using their money to gain control of important parts of the American economy.
Do they tie this back to the idea of the international Jew? Are they saying this is part of a global plan?
Yes. They argue that these actions in the U.S. are part of a bigger plan to weaken what they call Gentile institutions and eventually take over the country.
Wow.
They even suggest that Jewish interests are manipulating American politics, just like they claim they've done in other countries.
That's a pretty scary thought.
It is. And again, we have to remember the time period these articles were written in. The early 20th century was a time of huge change. Lots of anxiety about immigration, economic inequality, and new ideologies.
So are you saying that the author might be using these anxieties?
It's possible, offering a simple explanation for complex problems. By blaming everything on one group, the international Jew. That's a key point. Whether or not you buy into what the author's saying, we need to understand how they're framing the issue. They're presenting this narrative of us versus them, where Jewish interests are opposed to the well-being of the Gentile world.
So it sounds like they're trying to create fear and division.
Exactly. And they're using historical examples, real events as evidence. Even though those connections might be weak or based on speculation. It's this mix of fact and fiction that makes these articles so potentially dangerous. They play on existing prejudices and offer simple answers for really complicated issues.
And we can't forget that they rely on the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which has been proven to be fake.
Exactly. Using a known forgery really hurts their credibility. It suggests they're willing to use unreliable sources, which means we need to be even more critical when reading these articles.
It also makes you wonder about the author's real intentions. Were they trying to expose some hidden truth? Or were they just trying to stir up fear and prejudice for their own reasons?
That's a question historians are still debating. It's hard to know for sure what motivated the author. But there's no denying the impact their words had. These articles helped spread anti-Semitic beliefs and contributed to a climate where discrimination and violence against Jewish people could happen.
It's a reminder that words have power and that they can be used to justify harmful actions.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder of how important critical thinking is. We need to question assumptions, especially when they're presented as absolute truths. And we need to be wary of stories that simplify complex issues or rely on stereotypes.
You know, as we're talking about all this, I keep thinking about how relevant these themes are today. The idea of scapegoating, blaming a certain group for society's problems. That's something we still see all the time.
You're right. The methods might be different. But the prejudice and the desire for easy answers are still there.
It's unsettling to see that the same kind of language used almost 100 years ago is still being used today, even if the targets are different.
It is unsettling. It shows how deep-rooted these prejudices can be and how important it is to challenge them whenever we see them.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
You're right. There's still so much to unpack in these articles. And I think it's going to get even more interesting as we delve deeper into the author's claims about Jewish influence in media politics and global events.
I'm ready to dive deeper. Let's continue this conversation in part 3.
Okay, so we've spent the last couple parts really looking closely at these Dearborn Independent articles.
And it seems like the author really connects what they call Jewish power to the chaos of the early 1900s.
Right. They go beyond just saying it's about wealth or influence. They suggest there's this fundamental difference in thinking, a Jewish mind, as they call it, that sets Jewish people apart.
Like they're saying there's something different about how Jewish people think that makes them more likely to be subversive or manipulative?
That's the idea. They even try to connect Jewish people to the rise of liberal and progressive ideas,
Okay.
suggesting those are tactics to weaken traditional values and systems.
That's interesting because historically, a lot of Jewish people have been at the forefront of social justice movements.
Yeah.
It seems kind of contradictory to say they're undermining the very systems they're working to change.
Yeah, you've hit on a big problem with the author's logic.
Okay.
They're taking a very complex history
Okay.
of social and political change
Yeah.
and twisting it into this simple story
Okay.
of Jewish manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Any challenge to the way things are,
Yeah.
any push for change is automatically suspicious if it can be linked back to Jewish involvement.
So basically, any progress is bad if Jewish people are involved.
That's the implication.
Oh, wow.
And it feeds into this really old and dangerous stereotype that Jewish people are disloyal to the countries they live in.
Right.
This idea has been used to justify so much discrimination and violence over the centuries.
The author even says that Jewish people are actively working against governments all over the world.
Yeah.
With the goal of creating a Jewish world order.
Exactly.
Wow.
And they present it as this urgent danger.
Okay.
Something that needs to be stopped right now.
Okay.
That kind of fear-mongering can really affect how people see and treat Jewish people.
Yeah, it's easy to see how this rhetoric could make people suspicious and distrustful, seeing every action by a Jewish person as part of some big evil plan.
Exactly. It can create a climate where violence and discrimination are seen as okay, even necessary to protect against this perceived threat.
It's pretty disturbing how the author actually uses the successes of Jewish people in different areas.
As more evidence of this malicious intent.
Yeah, like they're twisting good things into bad things.
Yeah.
Jewish achievements in finance, business, academics, the arts, they're all seen as signs that they want to dominate, not as proof of their talent and hard work.
Exactly. It's like their success is somehow a threat to everyone else.
Yeah.
It feeds into this idea that it's a zero-sum game.
Okay.
If one group succeeds, the other has to lose.
That's a pretty messed up way of thinking.
It is. And it's really dangerous.
Yeah.
We have to remember the real-world consequences of this kind of talk.
Okay.
It can lead to prejudice and discrimination, which can mean social isolation,
Right.
economic hardship,
Yeah.
even violence against Jewish people.
You know, going through these articles has been kind of a tough experience.
Yeah.
We've been looking at some really disturbing ideas and prejudices.
It's been challenging, for sure.
Yeah.
It's important to keep in mind that these articles are coming from a very specific and controversial point of view.
Okay.
We've been analyzing them critically.
Yeah.
But it's crucial that you keep engaging with these ideas carefully, question what you're reading, and look for different perspectives.
That's really important. We can't just passively accept information.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to sensitive and potentially harmful topics like this.
Exactly. We have to be aware of how prejudice and bias can affect how we understand history and what's happening in the world today.
And we need to be willing to challenge those who try to use fear and division for their own benefit.
Exactly. What we've done here is really just a start.
Okay.
It's up to you to take what we've talked about, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions.
Okay.
The most valuable knowledge comes from actively seeking it out and thinking critically.
We've seen the anxieties and prejudices that fueled these claims about an international Jewish conspiracy and how those anxieties were used to create fear and suspicion.
Yeah.
It's important to remember, though, that these views were, and still are, very controversial. Keep digging deeper into the history. Explore different points of view.
For sure.
And critically evaluate everything you find.
Absolutely.
What we've done here is just a beginning. It's up to you to continue the exploration. What else might have contributed to those fears about Jewish power back in 1920?
Yeah, good question.
Could those same fears reappear today, maybe targeting different groups or driven by different beliefs? Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep using your critical thinking skills.